read on Wikipedia about Maxwell, they're a little equivocal on Wikipedia about whether or not he was a spy for Israel. And
yeah, that would be the kind of stupidity that, you know, it should not be shared anywhere, you know, that Maxwell was not a spy for Israel. That's why when they buried him on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, that the Israeli leaders who were there that day said he had done so much for Israel that probably they couldn't talk about in our time.
Well, I will read this because I think it's a good kickoff to our discussion. This is on Wikipedia, and it kind of makes your head spin when you read it. And it also, when you read it, you think about Epstein too, because people are asserting a lot of similar things about Epstein. But it says the British Foreign Office suspected that Maxwell was a secret agent of a foreign government, possibly a double agent or a triple agent, and a thoroughly bad character, and almost certainly financed by Russia. He had known links to the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, to the KGB, and to the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad. That's a lot. Is all of that correct?
Well, the British knew a fair amount about Maxwell, and they would have done. I mean, he was an MP. He was one of the leading businessmen in Britain. And also, it has to be remembered, the British have probably had the best spies in Moscow for the past half century or more. They also had some of their own people that the Russians, of course, recruited. But they always had the best spies in Moscow. And they saw Maxwell flying in and out of Moscow and having dinner in the Kremlin with KGB chiefs and with, you know, the leaders of the Soviet Union at that time. They also knew that he was flying into other sort of Soviet capitals, Romania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia. MI6 tried to recruit Maxwell, but failed because Maxwell's allegiance really was to Israel, because he'd lost most of his family in the Holocaust. So he always felt that he had an obligation to Israel. But I think what you have to match, that Maxwell is almost, one could say, a kind of conflicted character. And he's also a person with a dual personality. On the one hand, you have probably one of the greatest fraudsters of the past sort of 100 years. I mean, a man whose activities internationally in terms of money laundering was really the template for modern day oligarchs. I mean, he was really one of the first. And then at the same time, you had a guy who was also a super spy for Israel. I mean, Maxwell was also feathering his own nest. So you had someone who was doing Israel's bidding and also doing his own. And Israel was willing to sort of look the other way. I mean, why not? I mean, because of what he gave them. I mean, he got access to everybody within the Soviet Union. Using Americans like the late sort of senator from Texas, John Goodwin Tower, he got access to Los Alamos and was able to sell Los Alamos to Sandia Laboratories, re-engineered software that helped Israel build its, steal America's secrets and build its nuclear weapons.
So let me start by this, because not everyone is saying exactly what you're saying. You're saying very definitively that he was a spy for Mossad. So how do you definitively know that?
Well, first of all, we knew his handler. His handler was one of the sources for our book, and that was Rafi Eitan. And Rafi Eitan was one of the most famous of all Mossad agents. He was the man who tracked down the people that sort of Moscow, that Israel was looking for. And, you know, he was famous within Israel itself. It wasn't just within Mossad. Rafi Eitan was a legend. And he was the one who ran Maxwell when Maxwell was stealing America's nuclear secrets from Los Alamos. We also spoke to other Mossad agents, some who had retired, and some who had been close to the decision to assassinate Maxwell. So, you know, it wasn't just that grouping within Mossad itself. We also had confirmation from other people who were connected to Israeli intelligence.
So, but he denied it his entire life, correct?
Yeah, well, nobody really asked Maxwell. Nobody was sort of saying to Maxwell, by the way, are you a member of, you know, nobody really had the audacity to ask Maxwell too many questions like that anyway. And, you know, a lot of people might have suspected that, oh, well, he's working for, you know, the British, or maybe he's working for the Americans. He was working for himself and he was working for Mossad, but also he helped, of course, the KGB.
Okay, so
because
I want to get to KGB. So bottom line, Israeli government has never acknowledged it, and he's never acknowledged it, but you're just saying you have highly credible sources within Mossad that confirmed it to you.
absolutely. Plus, the Israeli government, in a way, indirectly has confirmed it. I mean, here's a man who was given what was equivalent to a state funeral in Israel. He was buried in the Mount of Olives. Most of the Israeli leaders at the time were there in 1991. So, you've got some of them saying Maxwell did so much for this country that can't really be revealed. Now, if he's just a businessman, you're going to reveal it all and say, well, he set up this company and that company. What can't be revealed is something that is secret. So that was the admission that was made on that particular day. One Israeli leader said, he strode across the world like a colossus. Well, he wasn't his nemesis, Rupert Murdoch, but he still was, a very big figure internationally. He owned the Daily News in New York, he owned the Daily Mirror in London, and he had businesses everywhere.
So what really, in your opinion, drove him? What was his passion? What was extremely important to him in life?
Money. He was a narcissist. He was a man who wanted to be sort of striding across the world as one of the wealthiest men in the world. He resented Murdoch because he wanted to be bigger than Murdoch. Maxwell was always about money, no matter how he had to acquire it. And he had absolutely no.
What about personal convictions?
Personal convictions? Well, he was an MP at one stage. It's hard to know. His only personal convictions, I would suggest, was that he wanted to help Israel. And he was quite willing to do all kinds of things, really, to get Jews out of Russia. And he did. And he used his contact with the KGB to do that. So one can't sort of separate that from Maxwell in terms of his personality. He was a very important figure in terms of rescuing a lot of Jews who were trapped within the Soviet Union. So we have that aspect to him as well. And a lot of that is really forgotten, I suspect, in the writings about Maxwell. It's not forgotten by Israel. And that's why, of course, they gave him such a wonderful send-off.
So he was an Oscar Schindler character, at least half of him. Yes,
part of him was. He used his contacts with Russian oligarchs like Simeon Mogilevich, and also with Khrushchev, who was the KGB chief, because he was also helping KGB launder money, and he was teaching them how to do it. And during the late 80s, of course, the KGB was thinking about the future and wondering how they were going to move a lot of their ill-gotten gains to different parts of the world. And Maxwell was the expert at moving money into places like Cyprus, into banks in Switzerland, and other sort of parts of the world where money is hidden by oligarchs.
Now KGB and Israeli government and Mossad doesn't seem to be two entities that would cooperate. So was he working?
Well, he was the go-between in a way for Israel. He wasn't really the go-between for Mossad. He represented Israel. It was the same when he went to Czechoslovakia. He would sort of say, well, look, I'm representing the state of Israel.
But never in an official, but not in an official capacity.
No, unofficial. The KGB obviously knew that Maxwell worked for Mossad, but it didn't really matter to them. He was bringing, let's say, if you think about bringing a powerful U.S. senator into Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, and providing him with prostitutes, and those prostitutes were provided by the Bulgarian Secret Service, Stars having a Sigurnost. So the KGB knew, the KGB got a kickback in a way, because it was able to observe people that Maxwell was bringing in there, and so it was building compromat in them, as well as Maxwell building compromat on them. So you had this kind of duality, which sort of served everybody's purpose. And Bulgaria is so important. I think, it's forgotten in the context of the whole Maxwell story. Bulgaria is probably more significant than any other Soviet country at that time, because he was in Bulgaria. He was referred to by people there as the king of Bulgaria. He would fly in, he would have dinner with the leader of Bulgaria, and that was, Todor Zhivkov. He owned banks in Bulgaria. He owned companies. He brought he sneaked Western technology into Bulgaria so it could be re-engineered. He brought the kind of technology that Hollywood was using secretly into Bulgaria, so it could be used by the Bulgarian film industry. Maxwell was at everything you can imagine to make money. This was the kind of, crooked guy who was probably, one of the best of his time. He was able to fly in and out of the Iron, people call the Iron Curtain. Can you imagine? Nobody flew in there like Maxwell. The FBI recognized that. One of their files in the 1950s takes account of Maxwell's activities, selling books, because that was the front initially for him to go and sell encyclopedias and to sort of endear himself to communist leaders by having books written about them, biographies written and published to sort of, make them feel very comfortable with them.
And it's stated that he was a socialist, communist. What was he politically?
Well, this would be the sort of the British definition of it at one point, because he was a Labour MP. But I don't think that Maxwell had any great sort of political ambitions or I don't think ideologically, he certainly wasn't. I don't think he was a socialist at all. I think Maxwell was just a crook. And so therefore, whatever he had to do to enhance his reputation, whether it was to become an MP, member of parliament, that helped him. It also helped him in his career. It helped him in his business. So everything that Maxwell did really was to further, the riches and the bank accounts and to build bigger bank accounts for our friend Maxwell.
Okay, so let's talk Los Alamos. Tell us that story.
Well, Rafi Atan and Maxwell, Atan, with the help of the Justice Department, stole Promise software. And it was a very, very advanced software at the time from Inslaw, a company in Washington. And it was able to track people. So this was one of the first piece of software devised for that purpose. So the intelligence communities wanted it. The CIA, of course, stole it. But Mossad wanted it. And they wanted it for two purposes, right?
Hold on. Let me interrupt you and just tell you that when I tried to look up about this Promise software, it talks about it being a case management software used by the Justice Department
to track people.
Okay.
So therefore, what Mossad wanted, they wanted it because they wanted to re-engineer it. So Rafi Atan gets, can you imagine, this is a famous Mossad guy, Mossad handler, who's handling Maxwell. He encouraged the Justice Department to get him access to the offices, right, of Inslaw in Washington. He steals Promise software, has Mossad re-engineer it, and then persuades Maxwell to fly into Sandia Laboratories within Los Alamos, one of the most secret places in America. And he's able to do that. Maxwell's able to do that because he's already bought Senator John Tower from Texas. He's already paid him a down payment of $200,000 just to have him on his payroll, right? To have him at his beck and call. So he flies into Sandia and he sells them Promise software, but it's been re-engineered with a back door by Mossad. And by the way, he also sells that to a whole lot of other countries. I mean, he sells it to the Saudis. Mossad wants him to sell it to a lot of people. They don't care that he's making money out of it. He makes millions out of selling this software. And this is stolen from an American company.
Just describe the software for us a little bit more. What do you mean by it was able to track people?
It was a software which was built really for tracking people. So it meant that you could track conversation, you could track where people were and phones and that kind of thing. It was a very, very advanced software for its time. So much so that the CIA wanted it because other people wanted to re-engineer it. But the Mossad, they wanted to re-engineer it for a very specific purpose. And that was so that they could put it into other systems, sell it to other intelligence services, and build a backdoor into it. So they did that. And that's how Maxwell was able to sell it to Sandia Laboratories. And by the way, the FBI was informed about Maxwell's visits to Sandia and the investigation into that, right? And the suspicion that he was up to no good, it was buried. Now, you tell me who's able to bury that kind of investigation. The files, a lot of them, I was told, were shredded. And it speaks to other things, when you think about Epstein. I mean, how can you sort of bury a lot of stuff? You can bury a lot of stuff if you've got the kind of connection to intelligence services that Maxwell had, and I believe Epstein had too.
And he also sold it, you believe, to the KGB, the software.
Yeah, he sold it to everybody.
And why? Why would Israel be okay with him selling it?
And he also sold it to China.
So everybody's got the software now.
Everybody's got this. Absolutely.
Was he selling it on behalf of Israel or behalf of himself?
Both. Maxwell didn't do anything that didn't give him a kickback. Everything that Maxwell did was also for the glory of Robert Maxwell. And
just to be clear, why would Israel be okay with, for instance, Soviet Union and China having this?
No, but the thing about what Maxwell was doing, what he was selling was re-engineered, by Mossad. So the software had been re-engineered with a back door. So that's why it was being sold, so that they could pull information out of it, right? So,
and KGB's not aware that they're buying something that has a back door? That I
would say it probably didn't take them too long to find out. I would say it didn't take them too long to find out. Okay, but they tolerated Maxwell because Maxwell had a lot of advantage for them.
Joint ventures.
I mean, remember, you're talking about joint ventures that Maxwell had with the KGB. This is in terms of companies, banks. I mean, there's about almost 600 companies that Khrushchev, who was the KGB chief at the end of the 80s, was sort of building around the world. I mean, they even asked Maxwell to get involved in trying to sort of take down Gorbachev. And Mossad Maxwell went to Mossad and said, the KGB want me to help them take down this guy Gorbachev. And Mossad said, forget it. Just get out of that one. You're not going to get involved. We don't want our fingerprints and that kind of stuff. Right? So all this is going on. Maxwell is quite a character, really is.
Yeah. In the meantime, you've got his business side where he's taking on Rupert Murdoch. Why his fascination with taking down, or at least
it's maybe a bit. It's maybe a bit like Trump and Obama. The Trump sort of has this obsession with Obama, that I'm going to be better than him, or I'm going to, undercut him. Well, Maxwell wasn't really able to undercut Murdoch at all, but he saw Murdoch's empire expanding. And the thing about Murdoch, unlike Maxwell, when Maxwell is really down and needs a lot of money towards the end of his life, he won't do what Mossad tells him to do, because Mossad said to him, your nemesis, Murdoch, when he was really stuck and he was about to go bust, he took the advice of the banks and, slowly paid back all his debts. But Maxwell wasn't willing to do that. Maxwell wasn't willing to go public to be seen to be a guy who was going bust. But that's it. And so Murdoch was always there in his rearview mirror as the man who was, rising above him almost in terms of, building a big corporation.
I mean, ultimately, was Maxwell a good businessman, considering what the state of his business was when he died?
Well, the thing about it is we don't know what Maxwell hid. I mean, for instance, after we wrote the book, the British government approached me because they knew that I had undertaken most of the stuff about the Eastern Europe, because my wife was a Bulgarian journalist who helped me translate a lot of stuff that other people would never have seen, intelligence files, etc. Right, came out of the Kremlin and came out of Dar's having a Sigurnost in headquarters in Sofia. So I suspect in a way that was the kind of area that appealed to the British, because the British saw that and said, well, talk to this guy Dillon, because maybe he hid all his money in Bulgaria. Well, I don't think he did. I think he hid money in Bulgaria, but I think he hid money everywhere. So they said to me, look, can you help us trace his ill-gotten gains? So I really told them, I'm not going to use the word here, in front of you or your audience, but I told them where to go, but not in a very nice way, because they had been running an operation to investigate Maxwell and his money. And they'd gotten nowhere with it, but they'd never looked in Eastern Europe. I said to them, listen, if you want to look somewhere, you better look in Eastern Europe. Not just in Liechtenstein, not in Switzerland, not in the Cayman Islands, not in Gibraltar, not in Malta, but look in Eastern Europe, because that's where he spent a lot of his time. That's where he built a lot of his connections. And that's where he laundered a lot of his money. And look in Bulgaria particularly, because then you're going to find the kind of thread you need, but you're not getting any help from me, because you didn't give me any help when I was writing this book, so you can get lost. And they didn't. They've never really pursued that thread. And so therefore, we don't know how much Maxwell hid. So
was he able to put it in the hands of his children? Do you think the children now have the money?
It was suggested to me by a very good source that Maxwell, even towards the end of his life, was always concerned about building for the future of Maxwell generations, in decades and decades to come. In other words, the future of the Maxwell lineage, that's what he was concerned about. And so he was going to hide money so that money would be available maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ahead. So what happened to all his money? We don't know. Was he bust? Yeah, he was bust in that sense. I mean, he owed something like 500 million. He was really heavily in debt. He was going to be charged. There's no doubt he was standing high in a court in London, in the Old Bailey, as a common criminal. And also what would have come out about him would have been so shocking. It would have damaged the whole sort of Jewish community in England. So there was a degree of anti-Semitism and opposition to Maxwell anyway because he was Jewish.
You believe that charges were being prepared at the time of his death?
Oh, I think they were looking at him big time. They were looking at him. They wanted to take him down.
And what would have been?
There were a lot of people who hated Maxwell. They didn't just hate him because he was a crooked businessman. There was that anti-Semitic character to it also. We shouldn't sort of, ignore that. I think it's true. And it's something I observed in looking at the whole sort of Maxwell story. But they were going to take him down. He would have done time because this was such a massive crime. He had defrauded the pension funds of the Daily Mirror. In other words, he had robbed 30,000 members of the staff of the Daily Mirror newspapers of their pensions. That really was a kind of scandal. Maybe he thought he was going to pay it back, but Mossad was not going to give him that money, and neither was anyone else, and neither was Mogilevich and all these other figures that he was doing business with. And he couldn't pull money out of ventures, and he couldn't be seen to be pulling money from a lot of other places he had it because it would have exposed where he'd hidden his money. So he was left with one choice, and that was to say to Mossad, "Look, you're going to have to bail me out here. You don't want me sort of standing high in the dock in London. Look what it's going to do. And I might have to sort of, I might have to talk." In other words, he was sort of threatening Mossad. He didn't say specifically what he would talk about, but they knew. They discussed it within Mossad. And they said, look, this guy's becoming very unstable. So, what are we going to do about him? We can't let him go to court. Look at the kind of, story that's going to become worldwide. What's it going to do for the state of Israel? Because he had businesses and he brought businesses into Israel, and he was regarded as a hero in Israel. So suddenly, for the first time, you'd have this Israeli hero, standing in shackles in a London court.
How much of this?
That was scary for Israel.
These internal discussions at Mossad that you're referring to,
they were held at a very, very secret level, and they were held within a very, very tight group of people. And
what is your source for those?
The source are Mossad people. And
first-hand sources?
One was a first-hand source who actually talked to us, right, about the kind of discussion that had gone on.
And bottom line, he told you that Maxwell had come to them, told him about his financial predicament.
Yes.
Told them that if you don't help bail me out, this is going to go down very poorly for all of us.
Yes. And so the Mossad view was, we can't really, we can't tolerate this. We can't have this.
So what happens next?
What happens next is you have to get rid of the guy. But then you have to plan it very, very carefully. And Mossad plans things very, very carefully. I mean, it's one of those organizations, a bit like KGB in some ways, but I think probably much more effective, much more professional. They have their own poisons. They know they rarely get caught doing it. They got caught on one occasion trying to kill a leading sort of Palestinian, and they jabbed him in the neck with a serum. But Netanyahu was forced by the King of Jordan to fly an antidote in right away because King of Jordan had this conversation with him. I heard it. I mean, I heard a copy of it with the telephone call, in which he called Netanyahu everything beginning with F and said, I will ring Madeleine Albright and I will really take you down, right? And so Netanyahu put someone on a plane and they flew in with a serum. And this guy lived, and the Mossad team that had been captured was released. into French custody. So the Mossad does things in a very, very special way. So they built a team really to take Maxwell out. And they were kind of, there's a suspicion that they were promising him that he would get the money. Because the night that the night he disappears off his boat, there are certain phone calls which are very, very suspicious. So they may have sort of had him trail along until they were ready to take him out. And they had a team in the water who got onto the back of the boat. I mean, there was this sort of story that Maxwell fell off the side. Well, if you see the boat and you look at the sort of the
railings,
the railings, what the pathologists had to say in their investigations, then you realize he didn't fall off the back of the boat. There was no way, and there was no indication he was drunk that night either.
Yeah, nothing found in his system. I read,
but
he went off around 4:30 in the morning, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't know there's anything unusual found in the system, by the way. I mean, if the Israelis used which we were told they did, if they jabbed him right and put him in the water, then nothing would have been found. The autopsy in Spain was just a joke. Then there was one held in Israel, and the pathologist was Yehuda Hiss, who was a friend of the Maxwell family. And then the British brought in, of course, they brought in their expert as well, who didn't rule out the possibility that Maxwell could be murdered. So you had these sort of conflicting pathologist reports as well. But Mossad, we were told Mossad took him down.
You were told that by members of Mossad? We
were told that, yes.
People who had firsthand knowledge?
One person who was close to the decision-making process, and put it no higher than that. And when we spoke to Rafi Atan about it, Rafi Atan said, yes, you guys are right. But he said, I'm not going to go on the record to say I was there because he wasn't there when this decision was made. Rafi Atan had worked with Maxwell. He wasn't his greatest fan, but he worked with him. He was his handler. A lot of people worked with Maxwell and found him, a rather sort of disreputable figure. He wasn't a pleasant man to be around. I mean, here's a man who would sit with a sort of bowl of caviar and eat it with his hands. He had some disgusting habits. He was sloppy. Let's put it that way. But I think
urinating off a building, I heard.
Well, he did a lot of things. A lot of stories about Maxwell. I mean, some of them are apocryphal, of course, and some are not too far from the truth anyway.
But related to that, the story goes that he used to like to urinate off of his boat, and hence the speculation that, middle of the night he falls in.
Maxwell in his apartment in London, I mean, after going to the bathroom, he cleaned himself with napkins and just left them on the floor for the women, the maids who came to come and clean them up. That was Maxwell. I mean, he was a bit of a slob in many ways. But the interesting thing, he was also this towering figure. You can imagine him flying into Bulgaria in his big sort of jet, the king of Bulgaria, getting out. There's a big limo there, and there are security guards ready for him, and they're taking him to dinner. He actually took his yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, up into the Black Sea, and nobody went into the Black Sea. I mean, it was so heavily secured by Soviet Union countries, by Russia, by Bulgaria. And he went up there to one of the palaces of Todor Zhivkov because he just wanted to show it to his wife from the sea. Maxwell was a kind of strange figure for his time, but also very clever. I mean, no one can ever underestimate what Maxwell did.
Okay, so walk us through what you believe happened that early morning.
That early morning, I think that Maxwell was encouraged to come out on the deck to take a phone call. And it's the team that was already in the water, they'd been monitoring the boat, the Israelis from Gibraltar. And the team, they got on and they jabbed him with a serum and then put his body into the water. And this was a specialist Mossad hit team. So the thing is that, when you take a look at Maxwell and you say, well, what would have happened if they hadn't killed him? Then you realize why they felt they needed to at the time. they felt that they didn't really have a choice because Maxwell was going down. He'd really reached the pit, you know, of his abilities. I mean, there was nothing left for Maxwell. He knew that he was about to be wrapped up. The British were ready to move on him because they knew about the pension funds. So I think that would have been the end of it for Maxwell. But in a way, his reputation lives on. It lived on in Bulgaria. I'll give you an example. When our book was published in Bulgaria, and I sat down for lunch this summer in the Bulgarian capital, Sofia, and I sat down with a senior intelligence figure. And he said to me, when your book came out about Maxwell, he said, former communists who were in league with Maxwell in terms of his businesses, joint ventures, money laundering, they pressed the Secret Service in Bulgaria to bury your book. In other words, to make sure that it was only sold at kind of gas stations, wasn't sold in big shops, didn't go into libraries. And also the same thing happened really in the US. The book was leaked to the Maxwell family. Isabel Maxwell took a copy of the manuscript of our book, went to Israel, showed it to David Kimchi, a former head of Mossad, showed it to Shimon Peres, former prime minister, who was a friend of the family, and then went and took it to Rafi Atan, one of our sources. And Rafi told her really just to bugger off. Because she said, we want you to sort of come out and deny what's in this book. So that was leaked. Now, who leaked it? It was supposed to be under wraps. It was kept under wraps in London, but it wasn't kept under wraps by Carolyn Graff, the publisher in New York. And the only person I dealt with in Carolyn Graff was the late Herman Graff. And the book got one major interview. And that was really about it on the Today program. And we discovered really that NBC, under pressure from the Maxwell family when the book came out, was going to go and do a kind of hit job on the book by going to Israel and doing a documentary on Maxwell and his burial and where he was buried and what a wonderful guy he was. So we confronted NBC and they backed off. And all Graff wanted to know, before the book was published, is, are you going to blame Mossad? So I told him nothing until he got the manuscript. But, this kind of thing happened. So I had one interview, and I was told Matt Lauer didn't want to interview me. So it was left to Katie Couric. Right. And do you know the first thing Katie Couric said to me before the interview? She was sort of puzzled. I mean, she was sort of looking at me, asking me about Mossad and whatever. No. But the thing is that I suspect there are a lot of things that happened aside from the book that were meaningful. There were threats made, right, to my apartment in New York, to my wife. My computer was hacked.
Anonymous threats.
My car was broken into. I spoke to the FBI about the threats because I was in Ireland by that stage. I had acquired documents that I didn't want to be sitting around with in New York because I realized that there were certain. It's a bit like when I was thinking of writing almost writing the Epstein book. I began to realize that there are problems here. So I went off to Ireland for the Maxwell book to write it with Gordon Thomas in Wicklow, way outside Dublin. And then I get these calls from my wife about, threats to her. And I kind of knew where they were coming from. There were people really seriously concerned about what we were going to publish. So when the book does come out, it gets very, very little. The American public really doesn't see it. The kind of publicity that should have been there for the book just wasn't there. I mean, here's a guy who stole America's nuclear secrets. That's a story in itself. But a lot of people didn't want that information.
How about what Alan Dershowitz had to say about it?
Well, Dershowitz, here's the interesting thing, and you're going to love this story, because in 2010-11, I decided I'm going to write a book on Jeffrey Epstein. And Epstein's name I knew, because Epstein's name had come up when our book was published. Because
your book was published in 2001?
2002. Okay. So you have this guy, Alan Dershowitz, I know about, attacking the book. He's the most prominent figure, comes out, attacks the book.
He wrote a review of the book when it came out in 2002.
Yeah, and he hammered it, right? But
who is the New York Times?
I think it was the Washington Times, the Washington Post. And here's the thing about Epstein. or sorry, about Dershowitz. Dershowitz was connected to Epstein. And who was Epstein's lover at that time? Now referred to as Madam as well, fixer. It was Ghislaine Maxwell. So they got Dershowitz to come out and attack the book. He was the only one, but he was the most prominent person to come out.
And what was his primary critique of the book?
Oh, just to dismiss it. Yellow book kind of, that's it.
In other words, the not true that he worked for Mossad.
Don't read this. None of this is true. This is just fanciful. And I mean, people will say probably the same thing now about Epstein. Well, he couldn't have been connected to the intelligence community in any way. But it's interesting that that's where Dershowitz first surfaces for me in terms of Epstein. And, this comes back to my mind again when I begin looking at Epstein in 2010, 8 years later. And I remember, and I think, I remember this guy, Epstein, because he was connected to Dershowitz. Because when Dershowitz attacked the book, I had to ask people, why would Dershowitz attack it? And they said, well, because Ghislaine Maxwell is linked to his buddy Epstein, and Dershowitz is his lawyer.
Would Epstein have ever met Maxwell?
Now, this is something I really should clear up for you. There are people saying that Epstein knew Robert Maxwell. There's absolutely no evidence of that. I mean, people have said that Maxwell was involved with Saddam Hussein. There's no evidence of that. But, it was there. It was out there. But the Epstein-Maxwell nexus, not at all. The connection to Maxwell, if you want one, is Ghislaine Maxwell, in the sense that I think she's the glue that holds a lot of this together in terms of Epstein. And the fact that you find the same parallels in Epstein's life as you find in Maxwell's, because I believe that Epstein was a money launderer. I mean, people say, well, where did all this money come from? Well, where did all Maxwell's money come from? It didn't come from the Daily Mirror. It didn't come from the Daily News. It came from money laundering. It came from shady schemes. And I think that's the same with Epstein. And no one really asked where Epstein got his money. And also what money exists out there that Epstein has hidden, just as Maxwell hid. Epstein was doing the same kind of thing. Remember, he was flying in and out of countries all over the world with ease. He was flying into New Jersey. I mean, I had copies of the flight logs, Epstein's flight logs. And the one thing about them that struck me was, what kind of power does this guy have? That in these flight logs, the girls who are on the flights, their names are just sort of first names. So I was trying to sort of match those names against the names of girls I knew who'd appeared in the affidavits and in other statements that had been made about him at the time he was in Florida, being charged in Florida. So he was able to come in and out of the United States almost at will. Anybody who's able to do that has to have some very, very powerful connections. And of course, he's involved with Ehud Barak in selling software. And it's interesting, isn't it? Maxwell was in the software business too. And they also, I think, Epstein built compromat, as the Russians call it, incriminating evidence on people. And Maxwell did the same. He did the same with Senator John Tower and other figures.
When did he first connect with Ghislaine?
He connected with Ghislaine in the 90s, right? She was 31 when her father died. She ends up at New York. And remember, she had lots of connections in New York. I mean, Robert Maxwell used to fly into New York on his jet, but send his boat, the Lady Ghislaine, across the Atlantic, park it on the East River under the UN building, and then invite the high and mighty in New York, Clinton, you name it, they were all there. And they were all on his yacht for his sort of expensive parties with the caviar flowing, the Dom Perignon, the Cristal, probably Dom Perignon at that time. Yeah. And Trump was on one of those parties. So she had access to all of these people. And remember, our friend Epstein didn't. I mean, Epstein was messing around with people like Stephen Hoffenberg in Wall Street. And Hoffenberg says that he and Epstein were involved in laundering about 1.5 billion, I think it is. And Hoffenberg ended up in upstate New York in a federal prison. And he was there at the time that Epstein was in Florida being charged. So Ghislaine Maxwell had she was the glue. She was
Although
the
Epstein
fixer.
was with Les Wexner at the time, right?
Yes, he was. He was with people called the mega group. I mean, these group of big sort of businessmen who are linked to Israel. Some would say they're the sort of the rich Zionists in America. But I think that if, as I believe, Epstein more than likely was connected to Mossad, she was too. And I think that she would have been used as the bait. My personal feeling, I think that she helped Epstein moved in that kind of direction. In other words, where he wasn't just sort of the money guy, kind of crooked money guy. He was a money guy who could actually help Israel.
Now, why do you say that Ghislaine would have been involved with Mossad, considering what happened to her father?
Well, people said she was one of the Maxwells who felt that her father was murdered, but they all suspected that there was a case of murder. And it kind of suited, Maxwell's widow at the time, because it was such a massive insurance policy. She was paying $60,000 a year on an insurance policy, and that was a lot of money at that time. So murder would have been, rather than suicide or just, dropping dead off the boat because you're urinating, having a heart attack. I mean, murder would have been the ideal thing. That's what they were kind of suggesting at the time. But I personally think that Ghislaine would not have connected. She might have connected other people, but not Mossad to her father's death.
And what is it that you see when you look at Epstein that causes you to think he may have been working with Mossad?
Well, ask yourself this question. You look at what Epstein was doing. Epstein was abusing girls on a kind of scale which, is rare. He was trafficking girls in and out of the country, right? On his planes, right? And what happens? It's not just about Epstein's money. Nobody gets the kind of deal that he gets from the federal government. Nobody in the federal government can do that deal without some kind of pressure from above or from very, very powerful sources who have their own connections to Israel. So I think that's why he got the deal. Look, any other guy who's just a pedophile, right? And it doesn't matter if he's a billionaire pedophile or not, would have gone down. It wouldn't have mattered if he had the best lawyers in the world. The evidence was devastating. The evidence against him, all these girls, and of course they hired private detectives. They harassed the families, all of that. You'll hear all of that story, but you've got to ask yourself the question: who gives them a slap in the wrist? Nobody gets a slap in the wrist. Now, because of the Me Too movement and all, things changed, and I think because of some of the journalism involved in Florida, that's where things began to sort of sour.
Well, so some people think what changed is administrations. So under Bush and Obama, he had sufficient connections to keep him out of jail, and under Trump, he did not.
It's possible. It's an interesting theory. I don't know. I would suggest it's probably slightly flawed, because if you really look at it, and if you look at the fact that Kushner, right, who's Trump's son-in-law, is a family friend of Netanyahu, the Trump is surrounded by some of the leading Zionists in America, like Sheldon Adelson. He does everything Israel wants. So I don't think that would be the case at all. These sort of pressures come from other sort of angles. So within the federal government, might have come from the intelligence community, where they were sort of told, lay off, because Israel's an ally. And if our friend Epstein, right, they're saying to the CIA and through the CIA to the federal government, look, you can't take this guy down because this guy is just too important for Israel. He's doing things that you don't know about, right? Now, maybe he's doing business with the Saudis. He was in and out of Saudi Arabia. He was a friend of MBS. Like Maxwell, he was maybe laundering money for some very important people in other countries.
Well, also,
and it's important to know that kind of thing. That's what intelligence services build information on people. They build files. And so the more files you can build, and he was providing girls for people all over the place.
Exactly. That's what I was going to add, is that he perhaps had the wrong people in compromising positions that they did not want to be disclosed.
I would say that's probably another factor. I would say there are probably multiple factors. And I'd love to know where all the material is, because this man was meticulous. And so therefore, there are probably files, or audio files, video files. Where are they? He had a lot of different setups I mean, I would say French intelligence probably have already raided his apartments in Paris because the French would sort of want to know. Because he boasted at one stage about a very leading figure, I'm not going to name this person, who provided twin girls for a night for him for his birthday and had them flown in from Paris and then flown back the next day. So, you know, there are a lot of people that Maxwell or that Epstein, you see the way you just almost instinctively go to Maxwell, that Epstein knew information about that nobody else did, that is valuable to intelligence services.
And then the two other ways that you can confuse the two is their death. Was it suicide? Was it murder?
Mysterious. I call Epstein's death a mysterious death. Because I never believe necessarily in official sources. Very often official sources are not that well informed and really haven't done the kind of due diligence that might be necessary. I mean, if an intelligence service really wants to get rid of you, there's one thing about it, very few people are going to know that they did it. That's why some of them are so good at it. But the Russians have got caught because they were using the kind of materials that left serious traces.
But it seems like there's a disconnect between justice and the intelligence community then, perhaps, because bottom line is justice is the one who chose to go back after him and arrest him and charge him, and then ultimately the court denying a $50 million bail suggestion. And then, you know, why was it pursued at the time it was pursued?
You make a very good point. I mean, it's not the James Bond world. The intelligence world is dirty, and also it uses techniques. I mean, the honey trap is a famous way of compromising people. I mean, the IRA used it, the Bader Meinhof used it, and intelligence services use it at a very, very high clip. And the Russians have always been using, you know, that kind of technique of putting women in place to compromise people and then videotaping it or audioing or else just getting affidavits from the women involved. So this is the kind of thing that Maxwell did, and it's the kind of thing that Epstein was doing. And you're right that I suppose justice comes out of it much better, but not that much better, because let's be honest, they gave him a slap on the wrist in Florida, right? And that really is just absolutely incredible when you think of what he did and how he was able to walk away.
Well, you're an expert on intelligence, so I'm just curious. I mean, do you really believe that it's possible that U.S. intelligence can infiltrate a federal prison and assassinate someone like that?
I think the intelligence services are capable of a lot more than we imagine. Let's put it this way. Israel's Mossad practices all kinds of, because they have to. They practice all kinds of ways of killing, getting in and out of places, and probably some of them were secret places. But if you take a look at how they've assassinated Palestinians over the years, they've killed them in hotels, they've killed them in hotel rooms, they've killed them in a lot of other places, right? They've killed them in prisons. And look, listen, the one thing about intelligence services is, like Mossad, they're experts, right, at getting rid of their enemies, and that's why Mossad is more feared than a lot of other intelligence services. If you ask the Palestinians, you ask people who are connected, sources connected to that part of the world, they will tell you that Mossad is always that big threat in the dark, you know. And I would say probably the CIA, KGB is the same. The KGB has been developing assassination techniques for well over a century.
Yeah, it's very easy for me to believe in Russia and in Israel. I have a hard time believing it in America.
Yes, I mean, I don't think, I mean, the CIA would have had no reason anyway to kill Epstein. They wouldn't. But I would say they knew about Epstein. If Epstein was involved with Mossad, it's about speculative. I mean, you can't say he was because there's no evidence there at the moment. But it's a reasonable supposition.
So tell us briefly
parallels.
Tell us briefly about the time when you were strongly considering writing a book about Epstein around 2010, and you had a couple people that had come to you with some interesting information.
A lady approached me. She was a socialite from the Florida area. I can't name her because I have no right to name her, and I wouldn't do it without her permission. But she's a very wealthy socialite. And she approached me and said, look, a friend of mine has read your book on Maxwell, and I would like you to write a book on Jeffrey Epstein. Do you know about him? And I said, yeah, I know some things about him, but I've read the stuff in the papers. So, I've read the Florida coverage. He said, yeah, but I've got a lot of stuff, and I've got a lot of sources, police, legal. I can provide you with a lot of documents. I said, okay, let me have a look at this material you have. So she gave me a large box. I went to see her, and she had an apartment in Manhattan, right, a high-rise, beautiful apartment. She was there with her dogs. We rich people love having these little dogs.
And this is soon after he had gotten done serving his time?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is what's interesting. I went through the material and I thought, well, a lot of this really it's kind of not very valuable because it's just sourced. It's easy to source this. But she also had phone logs from his big house in Manhattan, which let me see the kind of people who were phoning him, very, very famous people. And also the flight logs. And the flight logs particularly intrigued me because I wanted to know who was he bringing in and out in these planes? Who were the girls? But it was so difficult to actually match the names because you're just dealing with first names. But then I began talking to other people, and I began looking at a lot of the affidavits, and how this guy could possibly have got a slap on the wrist for what he did.
And she wanted you to expose the fact that he was exploiting underage girls. Was that it?
Yes. And I suspected also that she had some kind of history with him, possibly that he was her lover at some time in the past and maybe jilted her. She never really said so, but it was just a suspicion I had. And it was almost like a kind of unspoken thing. We didn't like to talk about it, if you know what I mean, because it wasn't really that important.
What did she say about the age of the girls?
She knew all the girls. She knew these were girls, little girls, a lot of them, right? These are school girls. And she knew all about his place in Florida.
The youngest we've ever heard is 14. Did she allude?
Well, she was talking about that age group, 12, 14. These were, schoolgirls. And she also was concerned about Ghislaine Maxwell because she knew from a lot of the affidavits, a lot of the legal stuff, that Ghislaine Maxwell was not only involved as a fixer recruiting these girls, but she was also involved in sexual activity with some of them. And the one thing about this woman was that she phoned me one morning in a very, very distressed state. And she'd been in Manhattan in her apartment. And someone had used a very powerful laser to put the image of a penis on the ceiling of her bedroom. And I said to her, have you been dreaming? Is there something going on here? She said, no. And she said, I know the shape of it because it's the same as Epstein's penis. And she'd sent me sort of stuff from the court filing, which he had a very unusual shaped penis, right? So I thought, well, look, I better check if this woman is just, out there somewhere.
That's about as bizarre as it comes, right?
Absolutely. So I went and I talked to someone who is, let's say, connected to the intelligence community in a very interesting way. And I said, is this possible? And he said, it'd be like sort of scoping this place out. He said, but a laser for that purpose only exists within the military-industrial complex. So the person who's done this has to have some very, very serious friends. Now, she didn't want to phone the FBI, but I know she phoned the sheriff in Miami and all this kind of stuff. She phoned security people in Miami. But as I was looking at Maxwell, I began to discover, and my wife was very unhappy about me doing the Maxwell book, the Epstein book, because she'd gone through the whole Maxwell thing, the threats and all the rest of it. And he was Mr. Untouchable. And there was a suspicion in my mind at the time with the Ghislaine Maxwell connection. This guy could be serious trouble for me, serious trouble. And I didn't sort of reach the conclusion he was involved in the intelligence community, but I knew he could bring people to my life that, might make my life very, very unpleasant. And I discovered that he learned I was working on a book. And I was told that he and Ghislaine Maxwell discovered that I was writing this book. So
had you actually started on it, or you were just?
Well, I was still doing that. I was still doing the research, but I was a year into the research. I mean, I was doing a lot of work on it. I'm talking to a lot of people. So I said to this lady, look, because friends of mine have informed me, I'm not going to get a publisher because nobody's going to take a book on this guy Epstein. He has so many contacts. He has so many big time lawyers. Even a legal reading of a book on this guy is going to cost a fortune. Now, if you would like to, right, if you'd like this book and you're so determined you want to have it, well, then finance it, right? And then take the profits from it. I don't mind. You finance it, I will write the book.
Did you talk to publishers about it?
I talked indirectly. I talked to friends actually who said to me, listen, get the hell out of this one because this guy is untouchable. Nobody wants to write anything about him. Take a look at all the newspapers. Who really writes anything about our friend Epstein? This guy's just too powerful a figure. And he's got the kind of connections that you don't really want to be close to. Now, I wonder whether those connections were mob connections or intelligence connections, but I wasn't sure which. So my wife said to me, look, get out of this. And I said, look, I'll give this lady a chance to make a decision. If she wants to finance the book, I will go ahead with it. So I met her and her husband in a place in the Hamptons. And she said, well, let me think about it and I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. Well, she never got back to me. So
how much did you need?
I reckon it would have taken me about 2 years. I'd have needed to do a lot of traveling. I'd have needed to travel to Israel, Paris. I was thinking about some of the places abroad that would have been valuable in terms of talking to certain intelligence figures that I know and to others. So I reckon to have written the book would have taken about 150.
150,000.
Yeah.
Did she think that he was connected?
In other words, to pay people off as well, because you'd have had to pay people off. You'd have had to buy, I mean, the best lawyers to lawyer this book.
Did she think that he was connected to Israeli intelligence?
No, she just thought he was the worst pedophile she'd ever heard of or come across. But she had a distinct hatred for this man. She detested him.
Did she tell you any story? Did she tell you any stories that we haven't heard yet?
No, you see, the thing about this lady was that she'd been talking to a lot of people who'd been investigating. This was in Florida. So she had been aware of a lot of the stories of the girls. And I think she felt really bad about it. And she felt that no one was going to get to this guy. This guy was just impossible, right, to take down. So she said to me, you took down Maxwell. But the thing about it is, I took down Maxwell after he was dead. Had I taken down Maxwell at the time he was alive, I don't think I would be alive.
What about this?
Had I been publishing this stuff that I published later about Maxwell, I don't think I would have kind of survived it.
What do you think about this James Patterson book that was written on Epstein about 5 years ago?
Yeah, I haven't read it. It was fiction.
No.
It was kind of.
I've read it.
I haven't read it.
I've read it. It actually contains, frankly, about half of the book is simply transcripts from depositions.
Well, those are all there. You know, those are all accessible.
Yeah.
I remember after Florida, the stuff was still available. You could have talked to I'd say privately talked to one of the lawyers anyway for some of the girls, and you would have got access to that. I read a lot of that material. I wanted more than that. I wanted to sort of tear apart the whole Ghislaine Maxwell and also the Ghislaine Maxwell Epstein nexus, and I also wanted to tear apart the financial world to find out where his money came from. So yeah, I was talking to various people about that as well to find out how he could, and also how he could have moved around the world. I needed access to intelligence figures to tell me how he could have functioned in the way he did, because my belief was that this guy has some power, and he's got some pull with very, very important people, and it's not just in the United States.
Let's go back to a weird subject, and that is his penis. I find it interesting simply because this guy was a sex addict. I mean, you know, the stories are 3 orgasms a day, 3 massages a day.
Yeah.
But you actually saw his penis. And I think you just described it as grotesque.
Yeah, it was a very, very strange shape. Someone said it kind of looked like an egg, you know. It was a very strange shape. It was small, but it was bulbous, you know, kind of. It was weird. Even all the girls testified. When they testified in court, they showed a photograph of it. I saw a photograph from the affidavits. And the girls all remarked, that was something they all remarked about because it really creeped them out, right?
And so was this picture taken by the police?
Yes. It was taken.
And then it turns out the girls were able to identify it, and so that was able
absolutely, because it was presented in court as evidence.
And going back to the penis on the ceiling, you're saying that this laser image was not of a normal penis; it was of a penis shaped like his.
She recognized it. She said to me, "I knew immediately," and she said, "That's what really scared me because I knew who did this."
So that means she probably had slept with him because they would have known that she would have known what his penis looked like.
Yes, it's possible. Or else she saw the same photograph that I saw.
Yeah. But still, so bizarre because you have to. I was shocked at the time. I thought, look, this is not real. This is just, this is a fiction here. And if this is the case, I better get well out from this lady's, ambit. Well, as you look back on that story and on her, what do you think?
I think it probably happened. She wasn't someone to kind of lie about anything. She had no reason to. And she wasn't sort of taking any sleeping medications. And the fact that she was scared of phoning the FBI, but she phoned me and she phoned, I think, one or two security sources in Florida, meant that she really meant business, and she was frightened. And I think she had reason to be. And he knew, by the way. That's how he found out about me writing the book. He found out through a friend of hers. And also, there was something else that I came across. There was someone else who was researching a book on him at that time. I can't really reveal the name of the person. But that person visited Epstein and then stopped writing the book. And this lady said to me, she was bought off. She said, I have absolutely no doubt about it. So, a lot of strange things happened around Epstein.
How do you evaluate Alan Dershowitz at this point, including the allegation that he also partook with girls?
The allegation is there. And, you can't just sort of walk away from it. I think the interesting thing will be where this goes from here, whether it's about sort of Prince Andrew or it's about Dershowitz or others. I mean, for the royal family, it's absolutely awful as a story. It really is, because they can't escape it, because the Daily Mail has been on this story. And interestingly, by the way, Vicky Ward, the Daily Mail, and the New York Post, you have to give credit to some of these papers before the recent very good journalism out of Florida, Miami Herald. The Post was following up on a lot of stuff. This was, of course, owned by Murdoch. And they were following up on the stuff about Epstein. And so was the Daily Mail. They were at it all the time. And so they haven't stopped. And of course, they're holding the Prince Andrew's feet to the fire. And he's saying, well, no, it never actually happened. But all of these people, one of the things that shocks me is that there's a very little focus on the fact that, Epstein, like Maxwell, was a disreputable figure. But you've got to say to yourself, how disreputable were the people who were around his life, who found it convenient to sort of socialize with him, the organizations who took money from him, funding from him. And also they knew, after the whole Florida thing, they all knew. And then there are people sort of boasting, Trump said, we like young girls. Come on. They saw him in the company of girls that, were younger than their daughters, a lot of these people. There was all the rumor about him anyway. It was out there. But after Florida, anybody who's involved with him after Florida, journalists are really looking. They should look at the people who are involved with him after that, who were still on his planes, and say, why?
Well, speaking of that, when do you believe that Ghislaine cut ties with him, if at all?
I don't think she cut ties with him. I think you've also got to ask yourself the question, why was she never picked up? Now, this is an interesting one. All the evidence, if you look at the evidence from Florida, look at all those affidavits, what all those girls have said. If you were a prosecutor, would you not have picked her up, hauled her in, put her under, interrogation, presented her with the evidence? Would you not be building a case against her? Now, they're all saying, maybe in the background is a case being built. But why, like Epstein, why wasn't she arrested?
And where do you think she is today?
I don't know, but I'll tell you something. She has to ask herself two questions, right? One, are they coming for me? Or two, are my backers powerful enough to make sure they never come for me.